Exactly 2 years ago, we decided to explore the depths of the NHL Iceberg, a list compiled of some of the craziest stories in NHL history, told or untold, that got progressively weirder and darker as we explored deeper. And since then, many of you guys have requested I do another one. The idea was intriguing, but I wanted to make sure I had enough stories that would be best suited for another iceberg video. So I've taken my time. And over the past few years, have been looking for some of the most bizarre, untold, and told stories that I could gather to share with you all. I also got heavy inspiration to finally create the iceberg thanks to one that made its ways around Reddit. It had some interesting entries, and I first discovered it on an Instagram page called Alex Ovechkin's Golf Bag. So I took a few entries from their iceberg as well, and with that, this was the final result. 7 new layers of the NHL Iceberg. Sit down, grab a snack, and get ready as we begin to explore the next NHL Iceberg. The 1919 Stanley Cup Final is notorious as it was the first time in league history where a champion wouldn't be crowned. But unlike other instances where it was due to a league-wide lockout, the reason for cancellation was far more extreme. In 2020, it seemed like a miracle that the league was able to continue after the outbreak of COVID. But in 1919, the finals were canceled due to the outbreak of the Spanish flu. That is mainly the reason why it's on this iceberg, but you know me, I had to dig up more, and the other stories that come out of this series were just as bizarre. For instance, Seattle went without their leading goal scorer Bernie Morris because just hours before Game 1 was set to begin, he would get arrested by US authorities for trying to dodge the draft, and would be sentenced to 2 years of hard labor at Alcatraz. And to make it even worse for the Metropolitans, they actually had a lead in the series prior to Game 4. Game 4 would be nicknamed one of the greatest games to ever be played, and would mark the only time in league history where a playoff game ended in a 0-0 tie. And in Game 5, the Canadiens would win it and tie the series. After that, the entire series as a whole would then go on to get cancelled. The Saskatoon Blues refers to the time when the Blues organization was in absolute shambles. The situation got so bad that the team would eventually boycott the 1983 NHL draft. We previously talked about this in a video before, so I'll keep it simple. The story goes like this. Ralston Purina, the current Blues owner, issued a statement saying it was looking to get out of the hockey business and warned that if an agreement couldn't be made to sell the team, that they would move the team to Saskatoon. In May of that year, the NHL would vote 15-3 against the sale, and because of the result, Ralston Purina would completely shut down all operations and would also do the unthinkable. Due to a dispute with the NHL, ownership refused to send a representative to Montreal to attend the draft, meaning that for the first and only time in NHL history, a team would not attend the draft, boycotting the league and forfeiting 10 draft selections along the way. Thankfully, the story has a happy ending, as a man by the name of Harry Ornest put together a group to buy and keep the Blues in St. Louis. The popcorn delay is a fun theory that some Jets fans came up with after a somewhat controversial delay in a playoff series versus the Jets and Oilers. The Jets had a 3-2 series lead headed into Game 6. After coming back from a 3-1 deficit, the Jets would tie the game, and it was at that moment when a fan would decide to throw a bag of popcorn onto the ice, delaying the game. Once it resumed, Yari Curry would score and help Edmonton win Game 6, and Edmonton would also go on to win Game 7, thus winning the series and eventually going on to win yet another Stanley Cup. In the Most Heated Rivalries video, I talked about this incident and mentioned how in every single broadcast re-upload, the incident can never be found, which is fine, but even after play resumed, there was no mention of said delay. The fun theory is that the fan intentionally threw the popcorn onto the ice so that the Oilers could have enough time to catch their breaths and regain lost momentum. Now, like some of you, I heard about the NHL 16 cover rumors about how the original cover was supposed to have both Kane and Taze before, well, the cab driver incident, but when I saw this on the Iceberg, I was genuinely surprised. I had no idea this was even a topic of discussion, but luckily, I found a comment which gave me some insight. Benev36 on Instagram mentioned the following, quote, "The cover vote was rigged because someone decided to make a bot to vote for Joe Pavelski almost every minute. That then disqualified him from winning it over Tarasenko, when the dude could have not done that and Pavelski may have won anyways." Which, if this was the case, it would definitely make sense. However, another rumor that I found via Reddit suggested that the cover vote was rigged because, at the time, Tarasenko was a more younger, talented star that could be more marketable for younger fans, as opposed to Pavelski, who was significantly older than Vladdy. But if that was the case, why even have a vote? I'm more inclined to believe Benev's comment, but I'll let you guys decide. Following the 99-2000 season, the Flyers would trade Rod Brind'Amour to the Carolina Hurricanes in a trade that upset some Flyers fans. Brind'Amour was a beloved member of the Flyers offense thanks to his blue-collar style of play and his goal-scoring abilities. But the real reason he got traded out of Philly may be due to a different kind of scoring ability, one that his teammate Eric Lindros had, as Lindros was not only scoring on the ice, but supposedly off of it, with Brind'Amour's wife. There have been many stories surrounding said incident, and no one truly knows what went down. The only thing we do know is that Lindros got absolutely destroyed. The rumor is that once finding out about the incident, Brind'Amour would smash a chair over Lindros' head, concussing him on the spot. Enraged, Rod would march up to Bob Clark's office and demanded that either he or Lindros get traded. The second rumor, which seems more believable, was that teammates Rick Tocchet and Mark Recchi found out and handled business with Lindros themselves, still resulting in Rod the Boz's departure from Philadelphia. The Richard riots occurred on March 17, 1955, after fans were enraged over a suspension NHL President Clarence Campbell gave out to star forward Maurice Richard. Following an altercation 4 days prior where Richard would hit a linesman, Campbell would announce that Richard would be suspended for the remainder of the 54-55 season, including that year's playoffs. Montreal fans were immediately enraged and protested against the ruling, stating that the suspension was due to Richard's French-Canadian ethnicity. On the same day of the suspension, Campbell would appear at the Montreal Forum to attend the Canadiens game, and what ensued was absolute chaos. The riot that was provoked from Campbell's appearance resulted in an estimated $100,000 in property damage, 37 injuries, and 100 arrests. Tensions didn't die down until Richard himself had to make a personal plea, where he both accepted his punishment as well as promised to return the following year to help the Habs win the Stanley Cup. The incident likely cost Richard the 54-55 scoring title and was a precursor to the Quiet Revolution. The Bailey Shore incident refers to an altercation between Toronto's Ace Bailey and Boston's Eddie Shore. Shore was a star defenseman, winning NHL MVP 4 times, but despite his on-ice success, he had a reputation of also being a very violent player, setting an, at the time, NHL record of 165 penalty minutes in a single season. He was known as a great player with not so great discipline. This was shown during the game between Shore and Bailey in 1933, where Shore would viciously attack Bailey from behind with a blow so strong that it almost ended Bailey's life. This blow would unfortunately end Bailey's career, however, and would lead to the Ace Bailey benefit game that would be held several months later. An event that was created to help raise money for Bailey ended up becoming something much bigger than it was originally intended to be. The game saw the Toronto Maple Leafs take on a team of NHL All-Stars. The benefit game would eventually go on to become the NHL All-Star Game, making the event the first All-Star Game in league history. The story of Richard Zednik is eerily similar to the story of Clint Malarchuk, And for YouTube purposes, I'll only be showing photos as the video footage is extremely graphic. In a game between the Florida Panthers and, ironically, the Buffalo Sabres, Zednik's teammate Olli Jokinen would get tied up with Buffalo's Clark MacArthur. As Jokinen began to lose his balance, Zednik would be skating by, and while Jokinen was falling, his skate blade would accidentally make contact with Zednik's neck, causing a horrific scene to occur. A trail of blood would follow Zednik to the bench as he was immediately looked at by team trainer Dave Zanobi. The home team's doctor Les Bison would control the bleeding, but noticed that Zednik never appeared to be near death. He would lose 5 pints of blood because of the incident, and the game would be delayed 20 minutes as the Zamboni had to remove the blood that was stained on the ice. The moment was so graphic that Zednik himself, after watching the video replay, said, quote, "Once is enough," but even after the near-death experience, he would return to play the remainder of the 08-09 season. Similar to Brad Marchand's 666th game and Pat Quinn night, the Sedin Twins' final home game saw a ton of strange coincidences occur that are extremely fun to point out. Hendrik wore 33 while Daniel wore 22, and those numbers would strangely appear everywhere throughout the game. First, the Canucks would take a total of 55 faceoffs. They'd win 33 and would lose 22. Daniel would score his 23rd goal, assisted by Henrik, which was Hendrik's 23rd overtime assist. Daniel would score 2 minutes and 33 seconds into overtime, making the final time played that game 22 minutes and 33 seconds. The Coyotes would also finish with 2 power plays to the Canucks' 3, and finally, Vancouver would end the night with a 22.33 power play percentage. Bill Masterton has one of the most tragic stories in NHL history. During the first period of a North Stars Golden Seals game in 1968, Masterton was carrying the puck up ice, passing it off to a teammate. What happened next was horrific, as Seals defenders Larry Cahan and Ron Harris would converge on Masterton, causing him to get knocked backwards and landing on his head. Like most players back then, Masterton wasn't wearing a helmet, and due to the force of the impact, the accidental collision and subsequent fall caused Bill to bleed from his nose, ears, and mouth. According to accounts, he would eventually lose consciousness before hitting the ice, stating, "Never again, never again," before passing back out. Unfortunately, 30 hours after his fall, he wouldn't regain consciousness and would be pronounced dead. What makes it even more tragic was that Bill's parents were listening to the game from home. Bill's death immediately sparked a debate on whether the usage of helmets were necessary, and the league would eventually honor Bill by creating the Bill Masterton Trophy in 1968, awarded to the player who best exemplifies perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. A while back, I was looking for stories for a video on the craziest free agent stories in NHL history, but due to lack of unique findings, it got scrapped. But one story I found was just too good not to talk about. In 1997, the New York Rangers would sign Joe Sakic to a 3-year, $21 million offer sheet that, if successful, would have made New York absolutely deadly, especially since Mark Messier decided to head to Vancouver, leaving a massive hole at the center position. But as we know, their offer sheet was unsuccessful. The Avalanche, despite their success in Denver, were struggling to gain money, and due to the way the contract was constructed, the Avs wouldn't be able to pay Sakic the $17 million needed for the 97-98 season, mostly thanks to the $15 million signing bonus up front. The Avs at the time were owned by Ascend Entertainment, and one of their subsidiaries, Beacon Entertainment, that year would finance the blockbuster film Air Force One. Beacon and Ascent were in line to take 10% of the profits from the movie, and due to the massive success of the film, they would receive $37 million. The cut of the profits was enough to help the Avalanche pay for Sakic's contract, allowing them to match the Rangers' offer. So, Avs fans can thank Harrison Ford for allowing them to contain their face of the franchise. perhaps one of the most infamous moments in NHL history, the Steve Moore-Todd Bertuzzi incident has been talked about several times before, so we'll keep it simple. In the matchup prior, Avs Steve Moore would injure Canucks Marcus Naslund, and the ref wouldn't call a penalty against him, ruling the hit legal. Multiple Canucks were upset, including Brad May, who issued a bounty on Moore, and Bertuzzi, who called them a POS. Those statements 5 days later would go on to look absolutely terrible. Canucks Matt Cook would fight Moore 6 minutes into the game, and as the game progressed, Colin Campbell, who we'll talk about later, placed a phone call to the referees warning them about a potential escalation in physicality. And sure enough, come the third period, with the Avalanche up 8-2, Todd Bertuzzi, in an attempt to provoke another fight, would follow Moore around, and after he ignored him, Bertuzzi would then grab Moore's jersey and punched him from behind, causing him to go unconscious. His head would hit the ice, and Bertuzzi would fall on top of his body. Several other players would then jump on top of Moore, causing an entire brawl to commence. Steve would get removed on a stretcher, and the hit would end his career. In addition, it would also result in Bertuzzi facing criminal assault charges and a civil lawsuit against both Bertuzzi and the Canucks. Years later in 2014, all parties would agree on a confidential settlement. In the last Iceberg, we talked about how Atlanta had not one but two chances to run an NHL team and failed twice, but their first departure in 1979 may not have even been to any fault of the city. The Atlanta Flames, despite what others may say, were able to create a respectable sports market in an area that had no hockey experience prior to the Flames. Being able to reel in over 12,000 fans and being above league average in attendance, they did what they could. Former Atlanta Flames goaltender Dan Bouchard would reveal in an interview on TSN Radio that the sale of the Flames came as a surprise, and only came into fruition due to other owners wanting Flames majority owner Tom Cousins out of the league. Why? Well, he found out some info that he wasn't meant to see. That being, that the league was pilfering from the players' pension funds. He found this out due to having Equifax look over the league's financial books. The other owners didn't want heat about it, and Cousins wanted no part in it. So before he could get the league and the other owners in trouble, and since the others already wanted them gone, Cousins would sell the team, and the league approved the sale. This post came from an Atlanta sports blog, and unfortunately, the link to the old podcast interview gave me the old 404. So if anyone can find it, it would be gratefully appreciated. But as a Calgary Flames fan, this story was absolutely nuts. Speaking of the Flames, the Dennis Wideman tax refers to this incident that happened in a Predators-Flames game in 2017, causing the referee to get injured on impact. But the Wideman tax is a theory that may actually have some evidence to support it. The theory is that ever since Wideman injured the referee, the Flames have gotten an increase in taking penalties. And an Athletic article that was created a year after the incident decided to take a deep dive into said theory and accumulated some stats. Shown are two charts: penalties taken and penalties drawn, and as shown, both categories see a huge inflation. Since then, the Flames have drawn less penalties, but have taken a significantly larger amount of penalties. An exact calculation shows that the Flames went from having a 3.1 calls against per game to a whopping 4.5 calls against, moving them from a plus 0.4 calls pre-Wideman to a negative 0.6 calls pre-Wideman. A simple explanation is that since the Dennis Wideman incident, the Flames have seen a net change of 1 penalty per game going against their favor. Some fans even agree that to this day, the Flames are still paying the tax, as there have been countless moments since 2017 where the Flames have gotten screwed over by a call going in favor of their opponents. The 2011 Stanley Cup Final is perhaps one of the most talked about due to the tons of controversy that surrounds this series, and a recent theory surfaced suggesting that Bruins goalie Tim Thomas's goalie pads were illegal. A tweet from Justin Morissette back in 2020 showed a DM he looked to receive that stated the following. Quote, "The NHL took Kay Whitmore off the job for the 2011 final because he was considered biased since he once played for the Canucks. Tim Thomas took full advantage and altered his pads with a strapping system that would close his 5-hole when he went down. His gear was never checked. Whitmore was and still is the NHL's goaltending supervisor, so it checks out. The theory also seems to be backed up due to Thomas getting sued by the equipment company Vaughn the following year after he was caught using Pico pads that were reskinned to look like Vaughn pads. I personally wanted to do my own digging and wanted to see how many goals Vancouver scored during the 2011 finals ended up being scored via 5-hole. And not a single one scored on Thomas would be scored 5-hole, which is just something I found mildly intriguing. We'll come back to the 2011 finals as we go deeper. The Pierre Turgeon theory is now a debunked theory that suggested that Turgeon was purposely being left out of the Hockey Hall of Fame due to him not participating in the infamous fight between Canada and the USSR at the 1987 World Junior Championships. This theory seemed completely believable, as for years many agreed that Turgeon should have gotten the nod, but finally it was announced this year that Turgeon would in fact be inducted into the Hall of Fame. The Turgeon theory is a perfect transition into these next two entries. One is a layer higher than the other, as it's more well known amongst NHL fans, that being the story of Billy Couto. Couto ties into quite a few things on this iceberg. Remember the 1919 Stanley Cup Final? Couto was one of the players hospitalized during that time, but Couto and Weidman share something in common. They both seem to enjoy fighting the refs. Couto, in Game 4 of the 1927 Stanley Cup Final, started a bench brawl supposedly by the request of his coach, Art Ross, in which he would assault referee Jerry Laflamme. As a result of the incident, he was expelled from the NHL for life, being given the longest suspension in league history, that being a lifetime ban. While on the topic of lifetime bans, this leads us to Flash Hollett. Digging through the HF board forums, I found a commenter who provided a brief snippet of Hollett's story. It goes as such. Hollett's production flattered significantly in the 1945-46 season as he battled groin and knee injuries and had a falling out with Wings boss Jack Adams. The argument was over Flash's contract. Hollett wanted a $500 a year raise and even retired in the summer of 1946 over the dispute. When he did retire, Adams threatened Hollett that he would make sure that he would never be placed in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Suspiciously, even after Jack Adams' passing, Hollett, one of the game's top blue liners of that era, is still not in the Hall of Fame. Similar to the Turgeon theory, this one may actually be fact. Jaromir Jagr is an all-time great, and his durability impressed many throughout his illustrious career. Come 2016, Jagr was 43 years old, and the Calgary Flames decided to give him a shot to continue playing in the NHL. His stint was sadly underwhelming, being mostly riddled with injuries, but it was expected due to his older age. However, once his contract was up with Calgary, no other team would give Jagr a contract. Now, could it have been due to his age? Maybe. It's a logical thought, but also it's Jaromir Jagr. He would instantly draw in attention from the media. The theory is that teams were told to purposely not sign Jagr as the league didn't want him to break Gordie Howe's all-time game played record, which at the time seems somewhat of a possibility. But as we all know, Patrick Marleau would go on to break Howe's record in 2021, which would then leave the question, why specifically Jagr? Teams to this day are still expressing interest in a now 50-year-old Jagr, but he still has not been signed. So maybe he still can't be signed, because his determination alone would most definitely lead him to eventually owning the record. When Tampa Bay entered the league in 1992, they were owned by primary owner Kokusai Green, a company based out of Japan that financially backed the team throughout 1999. Brothers Phil and Tony Esposito would reach out to the company in desperation due to lack of funds. But what they may have failed to realize was that the company, owned by Takashi Yakobu, was a front for the Japanese mafia. The Yakuza family used the team as a way to launder money, being known to do this with other sports teams as well. Former NHL president Jill Stein confirmed the rumor, along with many former Lightning executives. They should have known something was up though, as their original meeting with Yakobu was held in a particular erotic club with private chefs. When I mentioned we'd be talking about the 2011 finals again, this is why. Greg Campbell was a member of the cup-winning Bruins who happened to be NHL VP Colin Campbell's son. The theory is that the 2011 run was completely fixed in Boston's favor so that Colin Campbell's kid could win it all. A Bleachers Report article from 2010 revealed a series of emails from Colin Campbell that he sent to NHL linesmen. He distastefully called Marc Savard a fake artist, but an important line of this theory is where he would criticize officials who called penalties on his son. These emails would get leaked by Tyler Dello and would get uploaded to a website called mc79hockey.com. However, upon trying to access said emails, you get met with this. Since I couldn't access them through the main source, I had ventured elsewhere, and although I couldn't find the physical emails, I did find quotes and the basic context of said emails that I can explain to you all. So, the reason Campbell called Savard a fake artist is thankfully due to a high stick call from 2007 and not from the Matt Cook hit, but the player who high sticked Savard was Greg Campbell. A tweet from Alex Novat stated that Campbell was complaining and influencing referees not just to help his son, but also because, quote, he didn't think they would find out. And a fan on Reddit stated that the best honest example of refs potentially favoring Campbell's son during the playoffs was Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final versus Tampa Bay, where not a single penalty was called all game. Oddly clean for a game with such high stakes. The Adam Oates trade is highly regarded as one of the worst trades in Red Wings history. Oates at the time was still a young promising center with amazing face-off ability, and many knew he had potential to be a staple up the middle for a very long time in Detroit, so it came as an absolute shock when it was announced that he got traded away to the Blues. There was seemingly no explanation either. Whenever a move happens out of the blue, fans begin to speculate. I mean, look at what happened when Corey Perry unexpectedly got released. Well, one of the most popular rumors involves one of the greatest enforcers of all time, Bob Probert. In 1989, Probert would get arrested for possession of a powdery white substance while trying to cross the border. It's one of the most notorious scandals in Red Wings history. Numerous fans have stated that Mike Ilitch's daughter was in the back seat of Probert's vehicle when he got pulled over. And well, the theory suggests that Adam Oates was also in that back seat with the owner's daughter. This enraged Mike Ilitch enough to trade him away. This theory could very well be true, however my only question to this would be if Oates had to face repercussions via a trade, why didn't Probert? I'll let you guys decide down below. Alexei Sharaponov was drafted by the New York Rangers 17th overall in the 2007 draft. Many scouts believed he was poised to be something special, and with the Rangers needing younger forwards to round out their future core, Sharaponov seemed like an amazing pick. However, tragically, during a game in the KHL, Sharaponov would collapse on the bench near the end of the game, and would never get back up. He would be pronounced dead upon arriving to the hospital at the young age of 19. It would be revealed that Alexei would suffer heart failure while on the bench, and despite knowing the cause of death, numerous conflicting medical reports made it hard for professionals to determine what specific type of medical condition he had. This incident shook up the KHL, who decided to rename the Rookie of the Year award to the Alexei Sharaponov Award in his honor, and his team, Avangard, would retire as number 7. Because of his death, the Rangers would seek draft compensation, arguing that he was technically eligible to get chosen in the 2009 draft, and because Sharaponov never agreed to terms. They would be awarded the 17th pick in the second round of that year's draft, and the league created the Sharaponov rule, a rule that would allow teams to also receive draft compensation if a prospect they selected in the first round dies before being signed. Perhaps the most chilling coincidence, however, involved a certain player. Growing up, Alexei's favorite player was Jaromir Jagr, and the player who called for assistance, and the player he would eventually die next to that night was none other than Jaromir Jagr. The disaster draft is a draft that most professional sports leagues have pre-planned out in case of a, well, disaster. In this case, the NHL's is as followed. Quote, their plan activates if 5 or more players on a team are killed or disabled. The team would then select players from other NHL teams, paying with funds from a special insurance fund. Once its roster has 1 goaltender and 14 other players, a special draft involving the teams unaffected by the earlier selection could be held, with each team able to protect 1 goaltender and 10 other players. Think the expansion draft, but a tad bit more complicated. Luckily, there's never been an instance in which an NHL team had to implement the disaster draft. However, back in 2011, several former NHL players would tragically pass away in the Yaroslav Lokomotiv plane crash. The Arthur Kaliyev theory is absolutely wild and is one that I had to include in this video. The theory comes from Reddit and suggests that Arthur Kaliyev, the current member of the LA Kings, isn't actually the real Arthur Kaliyev. Confused? Well, here's why. Apparently, there was an age controversy during his time in the OHL, where some were saying that he wasn't actually 16 years old. There were also conflicting reports as to where he was born, with the Peterborough papers stating he was Russian-born and American-raised, the Hockey News stating he was born in Uzbekistan and raised in Staten Island, and the Hamilton paper stating he was born in Staten Island. The theory states this, quote, the player we know as Arthur Kaliyev is actually the real Kaliyev's elder brother by 2 years. Fake Arthur was born in Uzbekistan and moved to Staten Island. The real Arthur Kaliyev was then born in Staten Island and would die in childhood. And with the threat of deportation, the Kaliyev family forced their eldest son to pose as the real Arthur to ensure the family could stay. This is wild if it is true. The OP would leave a message saying, PS, no slander please, this is a joke, mostly. I would even reply to a user who was in complete shock by stating, quote, I'm pretty high right now and can't tell if this is genius or stupid. So either this guy uncovered something absolutely insane or simply was in a deep state of mind while being, well, high. December 12, 1970 was a date that Brian Spinner Spencer was set to make his NHL debut with the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is an extremely huge accomplishment for any player and is one that makes the parents proud. His game was set to air on CBC. Brian's father Roy was ecstatic, and the idea of seeing his son on Hockey Night in Canada excited him so much that he decided to celebrate in style. He would invite numerous friends and family over and would also purchase a television with CKPG solely to watch the game. But when setting everything up and purchasing the TV, he would learn that CKPG was planning to air a different game, one between the Vancouver Canucks and the California Golden Seals. Enraged, he would call the network to complain. Still upset, he would decide to pay the network a visit. Carol Fawcett, the receptionist, noticed that when a co-worker entered through a locked door, a man also followed him in. That man was Roy Spencer, who would go absolutely insane. He would rip all the cords out of the console phone and then would pull out a weapon. Sticking up the crew, he wanted to see the television operation room. In fear, Fawcett would tell the operation room to turn the television off. Doing this, of course, would make any regular viewer's TV go pitch black, but it seemed to please Roy enough as he would walk out the front of the building. Police surrounded the studio, and Roy would begin attacking them. One officer would make contact with Roy, ending his life with one shot. Brian that night would finish the game recording 2 assists, and some say that Roy would pass away as soon as Brian was set to have his first interview after 2 periods of play. The disappearance of Duncan McPherson is an eerie one with little to no explanation. After blowing out both knees and suffering a few other notable injuries, at just 23 years old, McPherson, receiving no interest from any NHL teams, was in a tough spot. However, things seemed to change when Ron Dixon, the owner of the BHL team, the Tayside Tigers, offered him a coaching job. He accepted the job, but unfortunately would never end up coaching for the team. Why? Well, Duncan claimed that he was also contacted by someone else. the CIA, who were trying to recruit him. This is where things get crazy. Duncan would borrow a car from a friend and would drive to Fussen, Germany, where he'd stay with former teammate Roger Kortko. Then he'd head to a ski resort in the Alps in Austria. He was scheduled to arrive in Dundee for his coaching job on August 12th, but when he never showed up, the search for McPherson began. He would disappear in 1989, but his remains wouldn't be found until 14 years later in 2003. He was discovered by a Stubai Resort employee sticking out of the ice of a melting glacier, meaning he most likely died in a snowboarding accident, right? Well, John Leake, the author of A Cold Long Time, an Alpine Mystery, stated that when his body was found, it was severely damaged, noting that his arms were both amputated as well as his hands and legs. His theory suggests that he still got into a snowboarding accident, but due to the damage done on both his body and his board, that an unaware snowcat driver would accidentally run over his body, killing him. And instead of reporting the incident, he simply tried burying the body in the snow. Regardless, it's still a horrific incident, and I hope that Duncan McPherson will forever rest in peace. Well, there you have it. The second NHL Iceberg is officially complete. I wanted to include several other stories, but decided to remove them due to them either being previously talked about a handful of times, or due to the topic just being way too horrific. But I do hope that you all enjoyed, and that this video was worth such a long wait. 2024 is just a few days away, and this is my Christmas gift to you all. Thank you all so much for the endless support. I'll see you guys in the next video.